Hey. Wow. Thank you so much, everyone who's subscribed to my Patreon. I feel a big weight off my shoulders. I feel so much more. Just like for the last few years, I haven't really felt connected to the video games, indie games community so much. I've just been less online, and yeah, it's nice to know you're all still there, and you still care what I do. Thank you. So, another video. I'll put up a poll or something at some point to try and get some idea of what people want to hear about from me. If you want to at all. Like, I'm partly doing these videos for myself as a practice, so it doesn't really matter if it's what you're interested in or not, but I'm putting time into it. Yeah, I'm not sure if people are interested from hearing from me about my games, or just would rather I just was making more games, or if you want to hear about different topics in games. So yeah, I'll put up a poll, and for now, today I thought I might talk about how I got started making games, sort of a strand of my life story. Yeah, let's go. When I was a child, my family had a computer, a Tandy, which ran an MS-DOS with a graphical shell. I can't remember the name of the shell, but it wasn't Windows. It was it just had the screen divided up into a grid of each application, and you could scroll through the documents of each application. And I played with it, and I explored it and found out how to get from this graphical interface into the command line, which was DOS, and that was more useful. And I found it had BASIC on it, GW BASIC, which it had an interactive shell, which I think is a really nice tool for learning to program. You type a command, and the command executes straight away. You see on the screen, you type draw a circle comes on the screen. It's just a responsiveness that you don't have when you're working in C++, and you have to type it all up and make sure there's no errors and compile or whatever. Yeah, I think as a child that was not ideal, but a good aspect to have in a first programming environment. And to write a full program in it, you just typed before a line a number, and it would put it as that numbered line of code, rather than running it straight away, and then you could type run to go through all the lines. And and then there was a command. So like maybe you wrote print hello, print where do you want to go today, and then you think, oh, I want something between those, so that would be line 10, line 20, so you write something line 15 that goes between. But if you put too many things between, you run out of numbers. So there was a command renumber, I think. You type renumber and everything was multiples of 10 again. So you, like, once you added some code somewhere and then renumbered, like if you'd remembered, kept track of what at line 360 there's the Crystal Castle, like now it's somewhere else. But yeah, that's anyway, it took some figuring out. Like I got books out of the library to read, to learn how to use it, and mostly I made text adventures, Zork likes, I like to call them, because that was what I could get to sort of work. I was done awfully with no data structures, just a separate block of code for each location. Yeah, I think there's something really nice about self-directed learning and self-motivated learning, and like seeing how a child learns. Like school saps so much of that away, and I think every child, if they're just given space to experiment and things to experiment on, like it was great that I had access to a computer, but pens, paper, instruments, anything, they will learn pretty well just of their own accord. You don't need to try to teach them. It's just the thing that we can do is support them and give them resources, better books, people who already know how to do the thing to ask for help, but never to tell what to do. Yeah, and at school I learned some useful things, and when we got to trigonometry I was super excited because I recognized that this was one of the missing pieces I needed to be able to make graphical games that I had not managed to figure out from first principles on my own, and I hadn't known what book to look at the library to discover it. And most of the kids in my class didn't have that motivation that comes from recognizing that the thing that you're learning is something that's of use, that you've already been looking for in your own projects. And yeah, for me to a lot of school was not things I've been looking for in my own projects or whatever, but lots of maths was, which I guess was how I went along studying maths for a while. It had use for me. Yeah. And later on we had a Windows 3.1 computer that had QBasic, which was a better BASIC, but I at first found really hard to use because it didn't allow for as much spaghetti code, which is how I'd taught myself to write at the time, but it was good. I made things, little things. But it also had a few games that had level editors, and that was pretty exciting at the time. Games should have level editors. I know, like, most of mine don't, but like they should. And then I guess for a while I was less focused on trying to make games, but I still did it sometimes. But yeah, speaking of editors, then when StarCraft came out and it had this amazing map editor with a lot of scripting, I was deep into that for a while. I don't know if I ever finished any like big maps, but I started a lot with like, RPG mechanics and unnecessary stuff. But then there was some people who figured out the data formats for the StarCraft files and then made editors for them, and that was fun. So for a while I was into StarCraft Modern, and for my if you know the game, there are various buildings that produce units and buildings that produce upgrades that give the units more damage or more speed or something. Some of the upgrades can be upgraded once, some of them can be upgraded 3 times, and that number is one of the values in the data file that these people figured out how to change. So you could make mods with the ability to upgrade your units a different number of times. It was a byte, so up to 255 times. And there was also a flag that they found for whether a unit was placeable in the editor. So someone made a mod of the editor that had a bunch of extra things placeable that were often broken and strange, but some of them were useful for custom maps. And my contribution to this project was, I realized that if you modded the editor to have a high number of upgrades allowed, and then you saved the map with that, that value would apply even in an unmodded game. So this worked for maps people could play online. Not for so there was a custom map mode where you could have scripting and things like this, and this could apply to that. And there was a melee or various other modes that just use the terrain and not any scripting or unit pre-placement. Oh yeah, so my contribution to StarCraft modding was realizing that you could mod the editor to have up to 255 upgrades and save that in a way that would be usable in a unmodded game. It's just a small thing, but it's funny to think on, because like that's maybe my biggest contribution to games. Like nothing that I've like no full game that I've made has been played by as many people as StarCraft maps that use that mod. So yeah, I may have peaked in my teens in terms of the number of people I might reach with a contribution to games, or maybe not. But that's what I think. The other thing I was working on with StarCraft was so there was one of the tools for modding it edited the data in the executable, and there were two places that you had to edit to change the capacities of a unit. There you could, in the UI, you could edit what buttons the unit has, but it wouldn't actually use those buttons if the unit didn't have permission to do that action. So, like a barracks has permission to build a marine, and a barracks has a button that builds a marine on it. A command center doesn't have permission to build a marine. You put a marine button on it, it still won't. The button won't work unless you also enable permission. And the neat thing I realized you could do with this was, if you had two different modded executables with the same permissions enabled in each of them but a different set of buttons, you could have an asymmetric competition. Like my barracks can build Space Marines, your barracks can build Fire Bats, but not vice versa, because they both have the permission, but each one only has the button for one, you see. And so my big project with this was to make a mod with 6 races. There was like they would start with the same command center and 4 peons. You couldn't so easily change that, but what each of those had the ability to build was different depending on which version of the executable you were running, but the executables were intercompatible, so you could play multiplayer together. So I never finished that. I may have like excitedly announced on the forums that I was making a mod with 6 races, and everyone thought it was impossible. It was a little bit of a cheat, but it was sort of possible. Yeah, I learned a lot from modding and like testing the boundaries of an existing game and seeing how they structure it and format it. Yeah, I definitely encourage anyone who wants to get into making games themselves, making computer games themselves especially. Well, if you're into board games and mod board games, like the same applies. Yeah, it's mod. I don't have that time. How long have I talked for? This is maybe getting too long. I have haven't even covered like actually making games. No, I'll just talk. So yeah, I went to university after school and studied maths and computer science mainly, and I was quite excited about studying computer science and programming because I'd always wanted to make games and been teaching myself programming, and I was going to learn it properly. And like, honestly, like, there's a few things I learned there, but a lot of the time I just stayed ahead of the courses. I was like, oh, we're going to learn 3D graphics. Get excited about 3D graphics. Start programming something with 3D graphics. Looking up tutorials online, doing it, and then like the next week go to class and it's just everything I just learned. Yeah, it's and a lot of the people in my classes were in similar boats. There were a lot of self-taught programmers who were just doing it for the credentials, basically, which it's a lot of time. Schools and education have taken a lot of time from us and not given enough value for it. I got more out of studying maths, which is why I kept studying it for a while post-grad, but yeah, I was making games in my spare time and studying maths and trying to do research in that, and it just became clear eventually which one I cared about more. Yeah, I was living in England, which was like for academic reasons, but it was actually, I feel, a really good move for game development reasons as well, because there just wasn't. There's more now, but in Aotearoa at the time there weren't people doing this kind of thing. There are now, and like when I've been back, there's been some nice meetups. But at the time, like, I went to a TIG Jam meetup, and it's just like my first time meeting other people who did what I do, and it was nice. It was nice. And yeah, just like that got me into the ethos of making games more quickly, because I've been trying to make big StarCraft scale RTS games and getting nowhere, and I've been following roguelike development forums, and everyone had their big ADOM-sized project that they were spending years on, and like they'd implemented monsters picking up items, but then they needed to rewrite it all from scratch so that the monsters could use the items, and it was like some wonderful games come out of that eventually, but like I think a lot of people like me just like spending time not having, but not having anything like a product to show for it, but like I definitely learned by doing that. Partly learning not to do that. Yeah, so at the TIG jams, yeah, it's good times. And yeah, I learnt to finish games, to make them quickly, not worry so much about getting them perfect, release them. It was a good scene to be in, and yeah, I met a lot of people, some people with connections, and then later when I was releasing commercial games, many of those people were sharing them with friends in the States, and like that's part of how they reached an audience, I believe. Like so I feel privileged to have been in a part of the world where there were these connections. As a kid growing up in Aotearoa, New Zealand, there weren't those opportunities to meet people who do this for a living and work with them, see how they work. It's all very far away, and New Zealand is much more connected than that now in lots of ways. Even obviously it's just geographically far, but yeah, for people outside of that part of the world, like I don't know how you what the path would be to get into this scene, even though it's so online.